Hello and good afternoon to everyone
Buenos
in the
días y
planetGOLD Global
bienvenidos a
Forum.
todos en Planet
My
Gold
name is
en
Kenneth
este
Davis,
foro.
and I
Y
work
yo soy
with
Kenneth Davis
UNEP's
y yo
Chemicals and Health
trabajo
Branch.
con UNEPS,
And specifically, I work
la
on supporting
sucursal de
our
químicos
programs
y
to help
también en
implement the
apoyar los
Minamata Convention,
programas para
including the
ayudar a
Planet
la
Gold program.
implementación
And I'm
de
very
la
happy to be
convención,
facilitating
incluyendo
this
el
session
programa Planet Gold.
for you
Voy a
on digital
facilitar esta
technologies to
sesión para
support
ustedes en
Responsible Gold. We have a really
tecnología
interesting
digital para
session,
apoyar o
and
lo
I appreciate
responsable.
everyone
Tenemos una
who
sesión muy
chose between the two
importante.
sessions
Aprecio a todos los que
to attend this
decidieron entre
session. I
las dos
hope you won't be
sesiones
disappointed.
asistir a la
Um,
nuestra. Espero que
so
no se
I want to
sientan
just give a little introduction to
desilusionados.
what we're going to
Y
talk
con
about
ello,
here.
quisiera darles una presentación de lo que
We're going
vamos
to
a
talk
hablar.
about digital
En
technologies,
primer
but of course,
lugar,
as you
vamos
know,
a
humans
hablar
have
de
been
tecnologías
mining gold
digitales.
for
Como saben,
millennia,
los
so a long,
humanos
long time.
han
And some of these mining
extraído
methods are some of the
oro
oldest
y han
technologies that
extraído
humans have
o
developed, in
tienen
fact.
tecnologías de
And
minería
in
desde
fact,
los
some
tiempos
technologies used by
ancestrales, se han
today's artisanal
desarrollado
miners
desde la
are the same
antigüedad
ones that
y
have
hoy
been
en
around
día
for hundreds or even
estos son
thousands
los
of years.
mismos que han existido
That's not
durante
to say there's
cientos de
not plenty
miles
of
de
innovation
años.
and room for
No
innovation
es
in
que
small-scale
digamos que
mining
no
and
hay
mineral
espacio
processing.
para
We've already heard
innovación y
in
nuevos
sessions
procesos y hemos
references to
escuchado
to
en otras
innovation,
sesiones
and we'll learn a
referencias
lot
a
more in this
innovación y vamos
forum.
a aprender
But for this
mucho
session,
más
we're
en
going
este
to look at
foro.
some of the
Pero para esta
newest
sesión
developments
vamos a
in
ver algunas de
technologies,
los nuevos
digital technologies, in
desarrollos en
fact.
las
And we're
tecnologías
going to look at their
digitales, de
impacts
hecho, y vamos a
on the
ver sus
ASGM sector.
impactos en
And I
el
think
sector
you'll see that
de MAPE.
with these new
Y como
technologies, there's a
ustedes
big
van a ver,
potential
en estas nuevas
for impacts
tecnologías,
on
los grandes
this ancient
potenciales de
practice
los
of gold
impactos
mining,
son en esta
from
práctica
furthering
del
prospecting to
minado
assist
y
miners
en la
in finding
minería,
gold
desde
deposits, to
prospectar hasta
tracing
encontrar
responsible
depósitos de
supply
oro,
chains,
a
to
buscar
monitoring
en las
environmental
cadenas de
impacts.
suministro
So one
responsables y
technology we're going to
monitorear
hear a lot about
impactos
today is
ambientales. Una
remote
de las
sensing,
tecnologías que
which
vamos a
means using
escuchar hoy
satellites, planes, drones
usar
to collect
satélites,
data on the
aviones,
Earth's surface.
drones
And remote
para
sensing is
encontrar
not new, it's been
datos en
around
la
for a while,
superficie,
but
y
recent
el remote
developments in
sensing
satellite
o
and sensor technologies
hacer
have really allowed for some
sensores
interesting developments
remotos
in
han permitido
capabilities that can be
desarrollos
applied to
y
ASGM,
capacidades que se
including
aplican
sub-meter resolution,
a
change
MAPE
detection,
y
detecting
algunas
changes over
soluciones,
time scales,
detecciones de
synthetic aperture
cambios en los
radar that can
tiempos
allow
y
us to see through
radares, y
clouds and
también
forests,
podemos ver
among
las
others.
nubes y
And I do
podemos
want to
ver
put
los
a
bosques,
shameless
entre
plug-in for
otros. Y
some
lo que
work
sí
that UNEP
quisiera
has
yo
done together with the
mencionar, algo del
Minamata
trabajo
Convention
que ha hecho la
Secretariat
UNAM
in Grid
junto
Geneva
con la
on remote
Secretaría
sensing
de
and
Ginebra
its
sobre
applications in
la
ASGM policy development and
sensibilidad
implementation.
remota y
And
el
I'll paste the link in
desarrollo
the
y la
chat to that work,
implementación.
which is
Ahora
a
pongan
good
ese link para ese
summary
trabajo
of the
porque es
state
un
of
trabajo
remote sensing
muy
and its
interesante
application to
de
ASGM.
los
We'll also look today at blockchain
sensores
technology,
remotos. Y
something I think
también
most of
vamos a
us, all of
hablar
us have
de
probably heard about
tecnología
it. Maybe many
blockchain.
of us don't
Muchos de
fully
ustedes
understand
hemos
it. Hopefully
escuchado y
we'll
muchos no
understand it better after
entendemos
today's session.
mucha de
And
ella.
this is used
Esperamos
as a way
entenderla
to
después
aid
de
in the
esta sesión y
traceability
se
of gold
usa
shipments
para
through the
ver la
supply chain and increase
trazabilidad
confidence in
del oro a
that
través de la
traceability and
cadena de
transparency.
suministro y
And
esa
during this session,
trazabilidad y
it will be interesting to
transparencia.
note how these
Y es
technologies, the
interesante
digital
ver cómo
ones
estas
and the other
tecnologías,
technologies, are
las
used to complement
digitales y
each other.
las
So they don't
otras,
operate
se
in a
usan para
vacuum.
complementar
For
unas a
example,
otras.
we'll
No
hear about
podemos en
remote
un
sensing
vacío. Por
data being
ejemplo,
used
vamos a
together
ver los datos
with
de
artificial
detección a
intelligence and
distancia
machine
o
learning to try
junto
to
con
enable
inteligencia artificial,
automatic pattern
inteligencia,
recognition.
machine learning,
We'll see
reconocimiento.
from our
Y
partner
vamos
that
a
uses
ver
blockchain that not only
de
did they
los
use
socios que usan
this new digital
blockchain, que no
technology,
solo
but they combine it with
utilizan
on the
esta
ground,
tecnología
boots on the
visual, pero la
ground,
combinan
old-fashioned
con
field work, groundwork to
otras
ensure
trabajos en
mining
campo,
sites meet due
en
diligence
tierra, para
criteria.
asegurarse que nos
So with that,
sometemos a los
I'll introduce our
criterios.
first speaker. I
Entonces,
will
con
also
ello
remind you that
voy
you can
a
put your
hablar
questions in the chat, and we'll
y
have a question and answer
vamos a
session
presentar al
after the
primer
speakers.
orador. Vamos a tener una
But with
sesión
that,
de
I'd like to
preguntas y
introduce
respuestas después de
the first
hablar
speaker, who is
de que
Pete
hablan los
Chirico. Pete is
oradores.
an
El
associate director
primero
of the
es
U.S.
Pete Rico,
Geological Survey's
es
Flores
director
Bascom Geoscience
asociado
Center
del
and is the
Centro de
scientific and technical
Geocentras
advisor
Bascom en
to the U.S. State
Florencia y es
Department's
asesor
Office of Threat
técnico para el
Finance
departamento, la
Countermeasures.
oficina del
Pete's been at
Departamento de
USGS for
Estado para las
25 years, and he's
contramedidas de
focused on
finanzas.
research on
Ha estado en
illicit small-scale
USG
mining of diamonds
25
and
años
mineral
y
deposits in conflict
tiene
zones,
más que
and the use of
ver
remote
en
sensing
trabajar
and
en ya sea
geomorphological mapping
investigación,
techniques
en
to
esta
understand
detección
small-scale mineral
remota y
deposits.
mapeo para entender
So,
los
Pete,
depósitos
the
minerales
floor
a
is
baja
yours.
escala.
Thanks
Y
very much,
quisiéramos
Kenneth.
darle la palabra a Pete. Muchísimas gracias,
I think think we could begin by asking the
Y yo
question,
creo que
why do we need
podemos
to do a better
hacer la
job
primera
prospecting in
pregunta y
artisanal and
empezar, ¿por qué
small-scale gold
tenemos que
mining?
hacer un mejor
Or how
trabajo
does improve prospecting help us with responsible ASGM supply chains. I would say rarely in discussions of ASGM do we focus on the underlying geology of the deposits themselves. However, knowledge of the geologic host rock and the processes of deposit formation can go a long way towards providing governments, communities, and miners with better information about how to plan, how to find, how to mine, and also how to remediate ASGM sites. But first, let's talk about some of the geologic challenges that we face in ASM. One of the primary issues is that the location, type, the extent, and the grade or the quality of the deposits in an ASGM context is frequently unknown or only very poorly understood. And our current understanding of many of these deposits that are being exploited today is based largely on initial exploration efforts that were done in the 1960s and 70s. Does that actually matter? I suggest that it does, because many of the deposits that small-scale miners are working would not have even been deemed economical or classified a deposit by mineral economists. And ASGM miners have discovered new deposits all over the world that have been previously entirely unknown. Additionally, large portions of Africa, Asia, South America are covered by deep soil or sediment weathering profiles, regolith or saprolites, what we would describe these as well as duracrusts, lateritic or bauxitic crusts, or the weathering products of those, which are called glacis surfaces, which conceal the underlying bedrock and the corresponding mineral signatures that we're interested in. The weathering and transport of these materials over geologic timescales may also lead to seemingly anomalous deposits with no known source zone. So much of this same terrain has a tropical or subtropical climate, which is obscured by clouds and rain. And correspondingly, temperate and tropical zones are covered by thick vegetation, concealing that underlying geology. The image on this first slide illustrates this very well. This is an image from Guinea in West Africa, but is probably very similar to places in South America or Asia. And you can see that the nearly persistent cloud cover in the background, as well as dense tropical forest vegetation in an area of artisanal mining, which is pictured in the foreground. So consequently, many of these areas where ASGM occurs would be regarded as data-sparse terrains. As a result of decades of exploration done irregularly by foreign-owned interests with a large-scale mining focus and using various methods of inquiry. And rarely is that data was it collected uniformly. And also very rarely is there even public access to this information that does exist. So exploration companies, frequently government agencies, hold this data as proprietary. They may charge fees for it or simply withhold it for competitive advantage. Many technologies like Google Earth, OpenStreetMap, and public access to Landsat and Sentinel satellite image archives have greatly improved our access to some of the basic mapping and imagery resources required. Yet, there still remain critical gaps in the scientific information required for mineral deposit assessments. And all of these challenges that I've mentioned leave a strange patchwork of information that require a great deal of effort and expertise to stitch together into some level of understanding of the natural resources. And remote sensing techniques can help to fill these gaps. Next slide, please. Broadly, we may speak of two types of just general deposits, the primary and secondary. Primary deposits are those that are formed in the bedrock itself, whereas secondary mineral deposits are where the processes of weathering, erosion, and deposition of the original rock materials have concentrated valuable minerals somewhere else. Prospecting for all of these different types of deposits can be addressed with remote sensing tools and techniques, a few of which I'm going to illustrate here and discuss today. But in general, I would categorize these into three main types of techniques. The first is the geologic, lithologic, or mineral mapping techniques. The second are the structural geomorphic mapping techniques. And the third that I'll briefly touch on are geobotanical mapping techniques. So first, remote sensing data can help to identify and locate the occurrence of lithologic suitable conditions. And lithology is really what the rock is composed of, using multispectral or hyperspectral remote sensing techniques. These multispectral hyperspectral sensors like Sentinel, Landsat, and Aster, they're able to see across different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum and can be used to highlight features that are not visible with the naked eye. Sensors suitable for these types of analysis, such as Landsat, Sentinel, and Aster, these data are publicly available and free, but they do require hardware, computer hardware, software, and expertise to process to the level of mineralogical maps used in exploration studies. Another type of data used by exploration geologists is airborne geophysical data, gravity and magnetics, that develop images of the magnetic or gravity anomalies caused by that bedrock lithology. Some of those gravity and magnetic data can even be flown now on drones, small-sized drones, which is a very recent addition to the remote sensing techniques. On this slide, the first image that you see on the left-hand side, image A, is an example of an Aster lithologic mapping in Oman, an arid, quite cloudless, and a terrain that's quite free of vegetation. And those would be the almost ideal conditions for this type of prospectivity mapping. And laid on top of that Aster image are the geologic contacts and zones that have been mapped. The second type of technique that I wanted to mention today would be the structural or geomorphological guides. As some mineral deposits are formed by the precipitation of minerals and fracture spaces within those host rocks, and they correspond very closely with structural features such as shear zones, faults, or fractures. So identification of those features are often considered vital for planning any kind of exploration strategy. Local fracture patterns are mappable on synthetic aperture radar data, such as those publicly available and provided by the Sentinel-1 satellites operated by the European Space Agency, as well as with globally available digital elevation model data, such as the Shuttle Radar Topography Mission, Copernicus, or the Aster GDEM. The image on the upper right, image B, on this slide, shows work that USGS is currently underway with our cooperating agencies, the Ministry of Natural Resources in Guyana, and the other agencies within the Ministry of Natural Resources, where we're doing some prospectivity mapping, and in this particular case are using synthetic aperture radar and digital elevation model data to map fracture patterns in an area of ASGM mining. SAR data and digital elevation model data are also available technologies for zones where there's persistent cloud cover. The third example is geomorphological mapping. At the bottom in image C, geomorphological mapping is particularly important in prospecting secondary deposits or placer deposits. Looking at suitable sites for deposition and occurrence can be modeled using digital elevation model data, satellite, aerial, or drone imagery by interpreting and delineating things like abandoned meander channels, paleo channels, hill slopes for ridges and plateaus for residual deposits can also be mapped. And that third image there shows a digital elevation model and geomorphological characterization of residual landforms in Côte d'Ivoire using Saga GIS, which is a free and open source GIS analysis tool. I want to mention geobotanical guides as well. So in temperate and humid climates where mineral deposits are obscured by soil and vegetation, there are some linkages between those concealed mineral deposits and vegetation relationships where either vegetation won't grow or vegetation takes on specific spectral characteristics because of those underlying geologic conditions. One particular example of this would be in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There's a particular type of mint with a blue flower that happens to grow preferentially on copper cobalt deposits. And those can be detected from drone or aerial imagery, which can help map them. So one or more combinations of remote sensing techniques such as these would be commonly used to develop these types of maps and verification guides. But one would need field data sample collection and possibly drilling, mechanical drilling, hand augers to build out additional mineral deposit models. And often a scientist using remote sensing is filling in the gaps between what's known and what is unknown. Next slide, please. So because of the diversity of minerals involved, the diversity of the geography, the physical geography, as well as the cultural geography, there is really no one-size-fits-all solution for artisanal mining assessments or prospectivity mapping. The challenge is that as the technology advances, we risk ending up with a growing gap between miners and the technology, and increasingly this gap can be filled by companies or organizations that are promising solutions for ASM, but frequently are not building capacity at the national local levels. So the following graphic depicts a data cube visualization where I've attempted to characterize several different examples of remotely sensed data that can be used for prospectivity mapping. And I've tried to assess those based on how accessible the data is, how useful it is for prospecting, and then how much expertise is required to extract meaningful data from it. In short, I want to highlight that while there are many techniques, data sources, those that are most useful for prospectivity mapping are also the ones that generally require the most expertise. Things like ASTER, hyperspectral, synthetic aperture radar, or airborne geophysics. We could also discuss artificial intelligence or machine learning image processing techniques in this context, and maybe separate some of the myth from the facts. So, how to ensure that responsible sourcing doesn't exclude miners or simply promote LSM, large-scale mining, at the expense of ASM? Because of the implementation or maybe even the requirement of using these types of new technology? And how do we make available prospectivity mapping products and tools for artisanal miners without violating national sovereignty and land title or land tenure, while also protecting the information from those who might use it in a way that would harm the environment or violate laws or disenfranchise ASM? We can discuss several of these themes in this session, but I would suggest that at the very least, we might mitigate some of these risks by doing things like using open source software and data formats, publishing open access peer-reviewed articles, including the models, the code, the results, insisting on wide data sharing agreements, and other types of open source sharing. In summary, better prospectivity mapping could help protect the environment by directing miners to areas where there's greater potential and limiting or preventing mining in areas with little or no potential, or areas where the impacts might be more severe. Improved prospecting could also lead towards a much better understanding of the mineral potential, and that would help inform discussions around sustainability, profitability, and mine lifecycle planning and remediation. So I'd like to finally just say thank you to the organizers for inviting me to present today, and I look forward to discussing some of these technical challenges and some of the solutions in a more detailed context in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pete, for that great presentation. And yes, certainly, I look forward as well to some discussion about that in the Q&A session, and especially starting to think more about how these technologies can get into the hands of miners and mining groups in ways that avoids any negative unintended consequences. So I'm going to now introduce our second speaker, And again,
presentarles a
before I
nuestros
do that, I'm going to
oradores
remind
y de
you to
nuevo,
put any
antes de
questions you might
hacerlo,
have
voy a
in the
recordarles si
Q&A.
tienen preguntas,
But
lo
our next
vamos a
speaker
responder
is
en la sesión
Marcus
de preguntas y
Scaramanga.
respuestas.
And
Y
Marcus is
tenemos a
the
Marcos
CEO and
Garmango.
founder of
Marcos
Minex.
es el director
And
general
he
y
is passionate
fundador de
about how
Minex.
technology can
Y él
improve
tiene
lives
gran
at a global
pasión de
scale.
cómo la tecnología puede mejorar la vida a
Minex
gran
secures the
escala.
mineral supply chain
Y
from earth to
Minex
tech with
tiene la
traceability,
cadena de
transparency, and
suministro
trust.
para la tecnología
The
de
platform is
tierra
used
a
by
través de
miners and
trazabilidad,
aggregators to
transparencia y
access the
confianza.
market, capital,
Plataforma de
and
Minex
to
se
operate more
utiliza para
sustainably.
mineros,
And Minex
agregadores
operates
y
across
acceso
all
al
minerals,
mercado
but focuses
capital
on gold.
y
And they're
opera de
working
manera
now in Burkina
sustentable,
Faso,
opera a través de
Ghana, the
minerales, se enfoca
DRC,
en
and
ora
Nigeria.
y opera en
Marcus, the
Burkina
floor is yours.
Faso, Ghana, DCR y Nigeria. Marcos,
Thank you very
quisiéramos
much
darle la
indeed, Kenneth.
palabra. Muchísimas
Yeah,
gracias.
thanks. Yeah, as I said, my name is
Y
Marcus
ahora,
Scaramanga. I'm very
como
good to
lo
be speaking to you today.
mencioné, yo soy
So to
Marcos y
just
voy
to
a
give you an
hablar con
overview, if we
ustedes
zoom
el día
out
de
on
hoy
what
para
are the
darles un
overall
panorama
objectives that we're trying
general
to achieve
de los
in responsible
objetivos
sourcing. I
y
think
de
there's,
fuentes
with a huge amount of
responsables. Siento que
theory, frameworks,
aquí tenemos
standards,
una gran cantidad
it's quite easy to actually
de...
lose sight of what
Es
we're
muy
aiming for.
fácil perder
And so what we're
de
looking to do
la
really is
vista de
how
lo
to
que
stop
estamos buscando. Lo que queremos es
environmental
cómo
degradation
detener
and human rights
degradación
abuses,
ambiental
so
y
indicative
abuso
of the
de
photo
derechos
on the left with
humanos,
the damage caused by
como lo
mercury
podemos
usage.
ver del lado izquierda, y
However, at the
el
same
daño
time, we
que
want
se
to
puede
protect
ver. Sin
and
embargo, al
empower
mismo
the
tiempo
communities
queremos
that are responsible
proteger a las
for mining these metals,
comunidades responsables
and
de
able to get direct market
extraer
access,
estos metales y
and
que tengan
to have
acceso al mercado y
prosperous
también que
prosperous
tengan
lives and incomes.
posibles
Next slide, please.
resultados. Entonces,
So
siguiente lámina.
the question I want to spend a bit of time on is what's the main
Aquí la
barrier
cuestión en la
to
que quiero
responsible
pasar algún
ASM?
tiempo
What's
es
the
la
main barrier
barrera
from going
principal que
from the photo that
tenemos
you previously
para
saw on the left
MAPE
to the
y
one on the right?
para la izquierda
And
ustedes ven
the key
y la
challenge here is
derecha
how to
cómo son
build
contrastantes.
accountability
Aquí
within
tenemos
mineral
que ver
supply
cómo
chains.
tenemos la responsabilidad dentro
The
de las
supply
cadenas
chain
de
where you have all
suministro
of
de minerales.
the minerals
La
coming
cadena de
from
suministro tienen todos los
rainforests where
minerales
they've used
provenientes
mercury that's damaged the
de
environment.
las
There isn't accountability for those
selvas
supply chains.
y hay
Okay?
una
There's no transparency,
responsabilidad
there's
de
no
las
traceability, there's very little
cadenas de
trust
suministro. No
between
hay
the suppliers and the buyers,
transparencia,
and people aren't asking the right questions
rastreabilidad y
about where these
tenemos
minerals
también
come
que
from.
mantener la
The key
vida
that's got to
y
be
tenemos
achieved here
nosotros que
is how do
planearnos de
we
dónde vienen todos los
enable
minerales. Aquí el componente
accountability
clave es
to
cómo
flow at
habilitar
scale
esa
over all of the
responsabilidad
minerals along
en
those
esta
supply chains.
escala dentro
And
de
that's really
todos
the
los
challenge that we're
diferentes
looking to tackle
minerales
here.
en
And
las
in terms
cadenas
of
de
the main
suministros.
barrier
En
to
términos de la
responsible
principal
ASM
barrera
and to create that
para
accountability
un
lies,
MAPE
we believe, in
responsable,
financing. It's very
nosotros
simple. The
pensamos
financing
tiene que ver con el
behind
financiamiento,
ASM
el financiamiento
in
que
particular gold.
respalda la
If you look at
MAPE.
gold, and which is responsible,
Si ven, por ejemplo, el
well
oro
over half of all
responsable
artisanal and small-scale
de
miners
casi
work
la
to mine gold.
mitad de todos
The
los
main challenge is
recursos mineros, aquí el
there's an
desafío
illegal
principal
market.
es que
There's an
estamos
illegal market whereby you don't
peleando
pay
con
taxes,
un mercado legal
and
en donde
you
se
can
pagan
so the
impuestos
miners can actually get a
y
very good price.
los mineros van a
And at the same
poder obtener
time,
un buen
once you enter
precio,
that
pero
illegal
al
market,
mismo
then
tiempo, una
immediately there's
vez
no
que uno entra al
accountability
mercado legal,
on
no
that
hay
supply chain. There's
responsabilidad
no connection
alguna
between
en
the
esa cadena
buyers
de
and the suppliers
suministro,
in a
porque
responsible,
no hay
transparent way.
comunicación entre el
So what you've got to bear in
comprador
mind
y el
that's
proveedor de
incredibly
manera
important is that
responsable.
as
Es
soon as you
sumamente
try to do a sort of
importante
responsible,
que cuando
transparent,
nosotros
or
tratamos
traced
de hacer
ASM gold supply, is you're competing against an
un
illegal market.
suministro
And the
de
illegal
oro
market already has
MAPE
massive benefits
es
against the legal
tener
market because they don't pay taxes. And if these taxes are 2 or 3%,
acceso
then that's a very large
a los
chunk of money,
mercados ilegales porque ahí no van a estar pagando impuestos y
make up for.
entonces ustedes van a
so
tener que tener ese tipo de
if we can go to the next slide,
compensaciones.
please.
Y bueno, si podemos pasar a la siguiente, por favor.
So as I said, we focus on creating a financing
Como dije,
platform
nos
for ASM.
estamos
So we focus
enfocando a
on
tener una
how
plataforma de
can artisanal,
financiamiento
small-scale
para las
miners, mine
MAPE y
sites,
cómo
cooperatives, and
los
aggregators get access to a
mineros
formal
y
source of capital,
agregadores van a tener
and we can
acceso
use that
a
capital as a
una
tool
fuente
to create
formal
traceability,
de
transparency, and
capital
trust.
que sea una
And if you speak to
herramienta
many
que
miners
pueda
on the
dar
ground, one of the key
confianza
barriers they
y
have, along with
transparencia, porque
expertise
una de
and
las
perhaps a market,
grandes
is really
barreras que
capital.
tienes es
How
falta
can
de
maybe
experiencia y acceso a los
how could you
mercados
get that piece of
financieros,
machinery that
es
can enable you
cómo
to
puedes tú
produce more
obtener
effectively
esa maquinaria
and
que te va
produce
a
more
permitir
and
una
therefore
mejor
earn more?
producción,
How can you
una
get that
mayor
piece of equipment which
producción
ensures
y por
that
ende,
you don't need to
cómo
use
obtener
mercury
todo este
in your
equipo
amalgamation
que te permita
and
tener
so on.
una automatización de
And so what we
datos
do is
y
how can you
así
use
otras
that
cosas.
financing as a tool
Cómo
to
vamos a
create that
utilizar ese
traceability, transparency and
financiamiento
trust.
como
And the
herramienta
second
para
thing that's
generar
very
esa
important to understand
transparencia
is how do you do
y
it at scale?
confianza
Because
y
if you look
rastreabilidad.
at many initiatives,
Entonces, si nosotros vemos diferentes iniciativas que se han
they do not
generado,
currently act at scale
no
throughout the world. If you look at the
contemplan MAPEs.
current
Entonces,
volume of
aquí,
traced
si uno
responsible gold
ve
that's been
el
entering the market,
portafolio
it is very, very
del
small. There's some great
oro
initiatives such as for FMAM,
responsable, rastreable que
but I
entra al
think FMAM
mercado
operate on
es
around 10 mine
poco
sites,
y
so
están
which is fantastic. But
operando en
there are
10
probably
sitios de
almost a
minas, que
million
es fantástico,
small
pero
scale
hay
gold
más
mine sites
de
around the world. So how do you create a model
más de
which
un
can act at
millón
scale and
de
drive
MAPEs
responsible sourcing,
alrededor del mundo.
bearing in mind that you're
Entonces,
competing
bueno, cómo
against
tener este
an
suministro
informal,
responsable
an illegal market?
compitiendo
Next slide,
contra
please.
ese mercado ilegal o informal.
Thank you. So what do we
Siguiente,
do? So
por
we
favor.
create, as I said,
Entonces, ¿qué es lo que hacemos?
we will look
Creamos,
to
como
secure the
yo
mineral
les
supply chain and
acabo
create
de
a
decir,
formal
tener
financing
una
platform
cadena de
for
suministro
ASM.
responsable a
So we
través de
try to
una
make the model
plataforma
incredibly simple
financiera.
because
Tratamos
simple
de hacer un
means that it's
modelo
something that can
muy
scale.
sencillo.
So
Sencillo
the
quiere
first thing
decir
we
que
do
algo
is we
se
have a
puede
commercial
escalar.
relationship
Entonces, lo
with
primero es que vamos a tener
the
una
supplier.
relación
So we would either look
con
to
el
buy from them
proveedor,
or we would look
entonces
to
vamos
finance them.
a
And then the
tratar
second
de
aspect is
financiarlos y el
we use
segundo
our platform
aspecto
and our
va
own
a
staff
ser que vamos a utilizar nuestra
on the ground
plataforma
to
y
assess the
software
mine sites against
en el
criteria. So at the
terreno
moment
para
we typically use the crafts
evaluar
criteria
los sitios
and
mineros de
created
acuerdo a
by
un
Alliance for
cierto
Responsible Mining.
criterio
We assess those
establecido,
mine sites
que
against that
sea una
benchmark
minería responsable
and
y
then
tenemos
that
todo
data along with the minerals can then
unas
travel through the
referencias
supply
para
chain.
obtener esos
And we
datos
also, that once we
que
have
nos
that
van a
data,
llevar
we
a
can then
generar
enable
toda
further
esa
financing
cadena. Esto nos
aligned
permite
with kind of ESG
tener un
measures, whether
financiamiento
that be pre-financing of
alineado con las
equipment,
medidas ESG,
pre-financing of
financiamiento de
the minerals
prefinanciamiento
themselves,
de
in
equipos,
order
de los
to help
minerales,
create this
para
kind of this
poder
drive for
ayudar a
responsible sourcing.
generar este
And really, this comes
tipo
back to
de
how do you create
suministro
something, a model
responsable.
within
Pero
gold
¿cómo
that is
podemos generar
competitive
algo, un modelo que sea
a
competitivo
route where
en
you
la
can
extracción del
smuggle
oro
the gold out? And there are two
y
things here.
que
One is
no
obviously
se
trying to
esté
cut off
robando
some
o
of
sacando
lessen that
de
gap.
manera
So, for example,
informal?
working with
Bueno,
governments to
¿cómo
reduce the
vamos a
taxation
nosotros a
to
cerrar
make it,
estas
because I think governments can get a
brechas? Bueno,
small,
vamos a
very
trabajar
small
con los
slice
gobiernos
of
con
a large
referente a
pie.
las
That's much
cuestiones
better than getting
fiscales,
nothing of
porque, bueno, el
of a large pie.
gobierno
So I
preferiría
think that's
tener
really
algo que
important
no
for
tener
governments to
nada.
understand.
Y creo que es
And then the
sumamente
second way
también
is
importante
really
para
trying to
el
use technology
gobierno
to
y
reduce
tratar de
the
utilizar la
traceability due
tecnología para
diligence costs
reducir la
that occur at the
rastreabilidad
mine site.
del
Because if
en el
having your field
sitio
assessors to
en
do all these
donde se
assessments is
hace
going to
esa
cost you
minería.
3% or
Vamos
more of the mineral
porque la
value,
evaluación te va a costar
then you're not
3%
going to be
o más del
competitive
valor del mineral
against the
y
illegal
en ese
market,
caso no eres
even
competitivo
if you're getting revenue from the financing of these
con
sites.
el
So that's
mercado
the second thing,
informal
and
y
that's
aun
really where
cuando
we
tú
use
estés
technology.
teniendo ya un
And
ingreso
technology, where we use it and where we think it can
La
be transformative,
tecnología y
is
su uso
creating
puede
a
ser
very
transformadora
cost-effective
cuando se crea
traceability and due diligence scheme that can be
un
used
esquema de
by
trazabilidad y de
responsible
diligencia
traders,
debida
financiers. This could be used by
y
a bank, it could be
tener
used by the financial
estos
sector, it could be used by a government,
financiamientos
it could be used by
respaldados
a
por los
trader
bancos que pueden ser
themselves
utilizados
to
por los
conduct that due
traders o
diligence,
por
that
el gobierno
traceability,
mismo
and manage
para
responsible
poder
sourcing
tener
in a
esta
very low cost
rastreabilidad
way.
de la
Next slide,
minería
please.
responsable a un bajo costo.
So just to give you an understanding
Siguiente, por
of the
favor,
technology
para
that we
darles
use.
un entendimiento de
So
la
as mentioned
tecnología
by
que
Kenneth in the
nosotros
introduction, we use
utilizamos,
blockchain
como yo
technology
le
as
he
part of what we do,
mencionado en la
which enables
introducción.
us to
La tecnología es lo que nosotros
essentially
hacemos y
aggregate
esto nos
data from different
permite
sources.
esencialmente
For
tener
example, this could be data
agregados
from
los datos de
the local
diferentes fuentes.
aggregator. This could be data
Por
from
ejemplo, del agregador
the government.
local,
This could be data from
que es el
digital payments, the
gobierno,
mobile money
datos,
company,
por
and
ejemplo,
aggregate that
de
within the
las
platform to have these
empresas de
different
pagos
sources of trusted data,
digitales
which
y
can be written
tener diferentes fuentes de datos confiables que se puedan integrar. Aquí vamos a darles un panorama general de los datos claves de las transacciones a través de 1,000 mineros de diferentes países y muchos módulos que están integrados en los, por ejemplo, conozca a su cliente, de todos los agregadores, los sitios de minas y también registrar las negociaciones con los intermediarios, los transportadores y también obviamente gestionar la manipulación de los minerales desde que salen de la mina. Entonces vamos a estar teniendo registro de las transacciones y entonces estar reduciendo los costos de rastreabilidad porque aquí vamos a tener una mejor imagen que tener a una persona en sitio constantemente tratando de hacer una vigilancia o monitoreo. Aquí la segunda es esta tendencia de tener diferentes intervenciones con imagenología y la capacitación de los registros de minería, las evaluaciones satelitales y el monitoreo de los sitios. Y todo esto vinculado al financiamiento. Y aquí vamos a hablar de las transacciones. Aquí tenemos los individuos, las personas que van a estar operando las plataformas que van a tener acceso a los recursos financieros, ya sean por pagos digitales, financiamiento o cheques de crédito. Nosotros trabajamos estrechamente con varios aliados, muchos de ellos son el gobierno, y también tenemos socios locales en los países donde operamos, como en Nigeria, y realmente estos aliados locales nos permiten llevar a cabo estas acciones. Ellos son los que realmente están participando en todas estas actividades y ven, puesto que ellos son los pioneros, de cómo pueden actuar de manera responsable, de manera formal, legal, teniendo un capital que los respalda también de manera local. Y aquí tenemos algunas de las imágenes de todos los participantes en las diferentes campañas que hemos emprendido y que hemos podido capturar. Siguiente, por favor. Y bueno, para concluir, un poco de información con respecto a nuestro equipo. Aquí nosotros hemos invertido mucho, como saben ustedes, tenemos a Max, que es el desarrollo de negocios, Eric, que es nuestro supervisor en DRC, Sylvie, que es la gerente de producto, Emanuel, que es nuestro director de jefe de inversión.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much for that
Como pueden
presentation.
ustedes
We
ver
also
en la pantalla, Mark,
look forward to
muchas
the
gracias
Q&A
por tu
and
presentación. Y bueno, estamos deseosos de tener la sesión de preguntas y respuestas para entablar una discusión más amplia acerca de esta plataforma y el desarrollo del financiamiento de las MAPEs.
Leon Radler.
Bueno, ahora me gustaría presentarles a Leon, el que está con Eleven Sources. Él es gerente para la gobernanza, 5 años de experiencia en desarrollos de proyectos en diferentes sectores. Eleven Sources trabaja con diferentes actores de las cadenas de suministro minerales, trabajando con negocios, gobiernos, para tener prácticas responsables y buena gobernanza de MAPE.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken. Thanks also to the whole team of the
Gracias,
Global
Ken. Muchas
Forum that makes
gracias a
it
todo el
possible here,
equipo
honored to
de
speak.
este Foro Global por hacer posible
Yeah,
mi
so I want to talk about the
participación
ASM Spotter,
en este
which is
evento.
a
Voy a
tool
hablarles
that
de la
allows
ASM
monitoring
Spotter,
of
herramienta que
ASM
nos permite el
from space.
monitoreo
It's
del
a joint venture
MAPE
between
desde el
Sources,
espacio.
where I work
Es una
myself,
empresa
and
conjunta
DIDA, which is a
conmigo
German-based machine learning and artificial intelligence specialist. The ASUS Water is supported from funding, with funding from ESA and the Amazon Co-Lab, Conservation X Labs, that also finances our current project or field testing project in Guyana. 11 Sources is a social venture, just briefly, we work towards a sustainable mineral sector that builds enduring value for society and the environment, upholding human rights, conducting business responsibly, and enabling good governance, which is very much which the ASUS Water is about. Next slide, please. So the ASUS Water, what value we propose with it? It's machine learning and AI software that automatically detects and monitors ASM. So it can help, or it does help government authorities, CSO, or industry to effectively, continuously, which is important, identify, monitor, and assess the direct and cumulative impacts of ASM. Next slide, please. Just as a quick reminder, I believe most people in this forum will know, so ASM is highly decentralized. It's over vast areas spanning. It changes very fast. An ASM site is quickly open and closed or left behind, perhaps more often. And it's difficult to attribute the environmental destruction to it. To do some monitoring about it is expensive. It's very intensive, work-intensive to baseline ASM, and it's hard to track because of these quick changes that can happen. And there is still little understanding of scale of it, actually, and of the drivers. What does ASM influence? Next slide, please. So what does the ASM Water solution then offer? It's a bird's eye view. It's on ASM. And the monitoring can happen nearly live, so whenever there is a new satellite image available, the ASUS Water can detect on its basis the ASM activity or activity changes. We're using public available satellite data, so that makes it quite cost effective. It can be integrated in GIS, geoinformation systems, which allows to put all the layers that you would have on your system, like land management information, permit areas or forestry concessions, protected areas like indigenous lands. So there can be immediately warnings installed if any ASM is happening in these areas. It can be combined, or it should be more so combined with on-the-ground monitoring. You can steer that very well in terms of giving alerts where activity has happened, but also where perhaps already identified ASM is inactive, where you can just save your time and money to inspect it. The ASM spotter does identify the ASM changes over time, so it does give an early alert mechanism to warn of rapid growth, or if any big indicators are coming in, you see it immediately, like mechanization can immediately increase the speed where ASM is spanning, so that can be monitored of the ASM spotter. And also very important, the retroactive application. So from the moment onwards that there is a satellite image, you can apply the ASM spotter looking back a couple of years to see how the sector actually evolved over time. Next slide, please. As such, then, the solution or the ASM spotter is of course an important contribution to the SDGs. I mean, ASM provides livelihood for millions of people in over 80 countries of the world, so there's a big socioeconomic potential. Though, as we all know, I think ASM impacts on human rights, the environment, or social impacts can be very negative. It's a very informal sector, so as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to actually get a grasp of what's going on, but nevertheless, it's part of the economy. And the efficient monitoring that the ASM spotter supports allows for effective governance and engagement with the ASM sector, which is important because we don't want it. I mean, we have policies that users would sign that it's not a policing tool, but it enables the responsible engagement with the ASM sector. Next slide, please. So how does the ASM spotter is built? I mean, we speak about two components and various packages that we can offer. The components are on the one side technology, and on the other side the advisory toolkit that helps clients or users to interpret the data and leverage it and basically engage with the ASM responsibly. So there are two packages. One is the standard, the licensing agreement that includes this safeguard and some basic training. You get the license for license fees. You get to use our data, and then very tailor-made to the demand or the request of clients. We can provide advisory modules that help clients to analyze and understand the ASM spotter data, to take action on it, really depending on the context, because in every country that ASM is happening, it's very different. So, next slide, please. Looking at the application, how it looks, we have a demonstrator on the right side. Unfortunately, it's a GIF movie, but it's not running. In 3 countries, you can look at it. Currently, we are working in Guyana together with the Guyana Geology and Mine Commission, which is part of the Ministry for Natural Resources. And we integrate the ASM spotter, we field test it. How can it be integrated properly into the monitoring and inspection process? Next slide, please. A little bit of a closer look into that. On the right side, you see an image where ASM spotter is integrated, or layers are streamed into QGIS, geoinformation system, which is freely available. And in yellow, you can see ASM sites in 2021 as a baseline, and in red, the extension from September 21 to January this year. So the mining officers, on the basis of this, can very nicely plan their field trips and inspections, because which increases the efficiency, because they would ideally go every 6 weeks to every mining spot. But once there are some that are not active anymore, which you can see, I don't know if the slide is a bit switched here. During the inspections, 25 to 50% of spots are often found inactive. So it's kind of a waste of money, one could say, and time to go to these spots that are inactive. But with the help of the ASM spotter, they can really steer their missions on the ground and be way more efficient. Next slide, please. So the current status of the tool, we have a functioning front end which allows users to define an area of interest. We also recently included radar detection that allows much more detailed change alerts or activity detection. We're integrating, as you just have seen, the ASM spotter into geoinformation systems, and we do support on-the-ground monitoring and mission planning. We're also looking for, it's a tool that's still being developed while being tested in the field, so potential next step, with more funds, we could clearly improve usability, automated reports, AOI uploads, mail alerts, something that doesn't need much tweaking, but it's always possible to improve there. Additional post-processing, which can feed in these automated reports, and we're trying to combine radar and optical detection to get the optimum result for our clients. Next slide, please. The partnership, as I mentioned at the beginning, is between the machine learning specialists from Berlin, that's DIDA, and Levin Sources on the other side. So our part, Levin Sources, is really how to use the ASM spotter data, how to inform the inspections, how to interpret the baselines, the drivers that make ASM or increase the ASM activities. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So that was all I wanted to tell you about the ASM spotter. I'm looking forward to questions and to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Leon. Yes, I'm looking forward to the discussion too, and we'll start that now. We already have a few questions from the audience, and I'll start it off. I'll try to make sure that we can kind of distribute distribute the questions around so that everyone can get some. And actually, first have a question for Leon, since you just finished. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about ASM spotters, about some of the technical details. Of course, nothing proprietary, but what is unique, I suppose, about ASM spotter in terms of detecting ASM from satellite imagery. Are you using image classification? Are you using AI and machine learning? And sort of what's the innovative part that you're bringing with this product?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I will answer it as far as I can, because our specialists from DIDA are not here, unfortunately. But we do use indeed machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we do train basically an algorithm with labeling context-specific on a small scale, basically maybe 10 by 10 kilometers, the ASM we see, and the machine learns by that. And we then get results as a first round, you can say, where we also then would label things that are falsely detected. And so the algorithm is getting better and better also with every project we have. No? We mostly currently trained for Latin America, for Amazonas area, certainly forested areas. We also did test runs in the DRC, which are also giving a result of over 80% of correctly detected ASM. And this is something that is increasing and getting better with every run that we do.
Okay. That's great, thanks. I'll now go to an audience question. And we have a question from Kevin Talmer. This is a question for Marcus, actually. Producing a queryable database, blockchain or otherwise, is powerful for companies serving clients everywhere. Is Minex different from numerous other tracking and information collecting systems? Marcus, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kevin, for the question. Yes, I think the way that we've built Minex is really from the ground up, from the field up. I think that's mainly what sets us apart in how our technology has been built. And we've also built that technology to enable a business model, a sort of formal financing business model as well. So I think we haven't built the technology just to focus on the mineral traceability. That's one aspect of the product we built. We've built the product a lot around the financing and how to create formal financial products for miners. This is looking at sort of the history of production, the sort of credit scoring features, the pre-financing tools, things like that. So we really focus a lot on the technology to enable the sort of financial products for ASM, not just on the track and trace. That's a component of what we do.
Thanks, Marcus. And if I can just follow up on that, on the blockchain for track and trace, could you just maybe explain a little bit about how that works for, I guess, for the folks in the audience who might, not be familiar with, why this blockchain technology would have an application in tracing something in the supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So if you're sitting at the downstream part of the supply chain, you're a jewelry manufacturer or something, car manufacturer, then you're reliant on the data that's coming from the source. That's really what's important here, is where the minerals came from originally and what the data was when it came from that source. So if you use any ordinary technology, then if we pass that data through a platform, then that could be changed by anyone along the chain. Whereas the benefit of blockchain technology is essentially that you take that data from the source, you're putting it into a digital safe, and then you're essentially giving the person downstream the key. So they know that data that's been entered at the source, and then you have to just focus on making sure you get trusted data to be entered at the source from like the digital payment providers, some from on-site assessments, triangulated from different providers as well. And then you can give that data directly to the person downstream. That's really the benefit, is that creating that digital safe, just being able to give one person the key at the end.
Okay, and I mean, you mentioned data entered at the source. I guess that's critical. Otherwise, no matter how secure or transparent your tracing system is, if it's that data entered at the source is not accurate, then it's sort of meaningless. So, I mean, I suppose this isn't just a question for Minex, but any entity that's wanting to track a supply chain, would need to think about this problem. Do you have any insights, I guess, from your work on how to ensure, this data entered at the source is accurate? Supply chain notwithstanding.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there are two ways of doing it. So the old way of doing it was to have someone visit the mine sites every couple of months or less frequently. They would fill out a report, and then they would come back every few months. And that's your single point of truth. The new way of doing it, and what we focus on, is on gathering as much data from different sources as possible. So, for example, one is digital payment readings. If you're paying the miners or the negocios with digital payment, then you have that digital payment record of X dollars went from this account to this person in exchange for this mineral, and that's incredibly powerful because you can that can be audited. That's a verifiable digital piece of information that's come from a server, and then you can combine that with the field audits as before, and you can combine that with a community system whereby we have an SMS number, so people can SMS in. You're just using a normal feature phone, they can SMS to the platform any issues in terms of challenges at the mine site or whistleblowing mechanism. So it's really about crowdsourcing a lot of the data from around those mine sites in those markets, and relying on many sources of data which you can triangulate and process, use algorithms to do that, as opposed to having one single trusted person who is fallible, who just goes through and assessment.
Okay, I see. Yeah, thanks for the answer. We'll go to Pete, who's been waiting patiently here with a question from the audience. Our audience member Olusola Oliani says it's a very important presentation, especially for mineral exploration and new discoveries. But how can these digital technologies be localized in a way that the ASM miners can apply them? I think Pete, you even said that you maybe could elaborate on this a little bit more during the discussion. So this is the chance, really. I think probably many of us have the same thought. These are, as you said, sometimes inaccessible technologies. What are some of the ways that they can be accessible to miners and applicable to ASM miners?
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. And I think there have been a couple questions that are very similar to this. Yes, it's sort of the holy grail of how to do this work. Obviously, there's a tremendous technical hurdles in applying remote sensing technology for mineralogical prospecting and other things. Artificial intelligence, machine learning would certainly fall into the same category as being highly technical. I think one approach is an approach that USGS as a U.S. government agency, our primary responsibility is to work in a government-to-government capacity. So frequently we directly engage with the Ministry of Mines or the Geological Survey of a partner nation, and those are typically the organizations that do have the geologists, geophysicists, and those who have been trained in remote sensing. And so ensuring that we can pass the technology at that level, at the national level, let's say, but then also, build a bridge between those national government agencies and artisanal miners, artisanal mining associations, or, if it's small-scale miners or small-scale mining associations. I think that's really the key, and trying to be sort of a broker of that information. To create a partnership between national level government who has a responsibility, frankly, for understanding mineral endowment of the whole country, understanding resources and the production capacities and things like that, and then also getting that information to the artisanal miners. That does require, I think, really thinking about how either maps or information are designed to be able to be used in an artisanal mining context. Things like education campaigns on how to use prospectivity mapping, how to say, once you've done some initial prospectivity mapping, maybe then it's an opportunity to partner with artisanal miners to go out and do on-the-ground field studies, so that it's not always just a government-to-government thing, but then you're incorporating artisanal miners and looking at ways of doing sampling and engaging with them, because they are, frankly, the ones on the ground who have the experience. But I also think that we can do much more in terms of ensuring that our, as I mentioned sort of at the end of my talk, all of the information is published in an open access forum, that the articles are peer reviewed, that the models, the code, the results, and the data sets are open access. We at the USGS, we have that as part of we have to do that as part of our requirements as a government agency. But we can also insist on wide data sharing agreements, make sure that satellite imagery is available to others, not just not just the government, but those like in artisanal miners or other associations. Academic organizations frequently have students and others that want to work in this space, and engaging them either in country or foreign academic organizations to partner. I think there's tremendous opportunity to do that, but I do recognize that it is a significant challenge in trying to build those bridges across multiple organizations.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, and I was going to ask about the academic context too, because I think, this is one area where I think having co-authors or PIs from co-PIs from ASGM countries is really important in building that capacity in academia, since a lot of this research does flow down from academia, and having those peer-reviewed methods is really important. So we have just a couple more minutes left. I have a question that probably several of you could answer or might want to try to tackle, and it has to do with remote sensing, but it's about a concern that I have sometimes, and that we hear sometimes, is that there's some maybe less than beneficial potential uses for remote sensing in ASGM, and I'm thinking about law enforcement or crime mapping. Not to say that laws shouldn't be enforced, but there are cases where remote sensing could be used to target informal miners in a way that may or may not be appropriate. So how do you, for those who use these tools or share this data, how do we ensure that we're not just using satellite images for busts or interdictions or these kind of strong arm approaches that we often see don't work in working with the ASGM community? So anyone is free to take that question if you want to.
I'm happy to start.
Yeah. What do you think?
So from the beginning, our goal was to avoid the use on such occasion, as you mentioned, that it's a policing tool or to bust the ASM miners with it. And we're using basically safeguards in terms of when you're a client, you sign that you don't use it for that. And we accompany the use of the ASM spotter. It's not like something you buy and then you're only on your own. If we would recognize such behavior, we would simply block your access, to say that. So it's a legal thing that we want to exclude that way. I mean, I'm aware that it still bears some risks, of course, for that. But on the other hand, of course, the satellite images that we use are freely available. And everyone can, if they know there is an area that is prone to that, you have one person looking at it, and you can use it anyway, in that sense, let's say.
Okay, so you as a service provider, you choose not to provide your services for those particular uses, I see. Pete, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think, I would agree with Leon in some ways, and I do think that as we engage with, in terms of the work that we've done, engage at a government-to-government level, we do communicate that, right? That our purpose in doing the work that we do is not to do an enforcement action or to do some sort of law enforcement or to bust ASM. Obviously, most of the contexts, ASM is legal in the country, permitted. If it's permitted, they have permits, or they're working on the proper land titling and land tenure and those types of things. So again, I think this is where it's an opportunity to work together to build those bridges between the national level governments and the artisanal miners so that we can come to solutions together and not have it be a tool that's used to either kick people off or, as I mentioned in my talk, to disenfranchise artisanal miners and say, oh, let's get large scale mining in here because it looks like this deposit's bigger than we thought, those types of things. I think that's where we really need to focus our efforts on understanding that these are tools that can be used for artisanal mining or small scale mining and not just larger context of large scale mining. So I think like Leon said, from the beginning stages of discussions of a project, I think that needs to be open and clearly communicated so that everybody understands that that's not the goal of the work.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Marcus. I don't know. You also mentioned that you use some remote sensing, or do you have anything to add on this question? Kind of on using some of these tools for crime interdiction.
No, I think the others answered it very well. I think, as Leon said, as long as you can see what people are up to and you have clear code of conduct with your platform, then you have some control. But I think that the challenge here is that as the uptake grows of these technologies, which we hope they do, it's very difficult to have control over all of the use cases, and I think a lot of
de todos los casos de estudio, y entonces creo que debemos de tener más práctica para poder gestionar las cosas caso por caso. Pero todo eso es difícil. Sí, creo que eso es que al final del día recordemos que estas nada más son herramientas. Tenemos muchas herramientas dentro de la caja de herramientas que nos permiten lograr los objetivos principales, que son compartir en el programa planetGOLD, pero también ampliamente dentro de la comunidad de las personas trabajando con las MAPEs para que mejoren de manera responsable su subsistencia y que se reduzca el uso de mercurio, que ayude a cada uno de los mineros, mineras, de tal manera que sea una contribución individual y traiga beneficios sociales y medioambientales. Creo que hemos visto que las tecnologías nos pueden ayudar a ese objetivo. Y creo que en muchos casos, como con cualquier otra herramienta, la comunidad pueda seguir participando con las tecnologías digitales, desarrollando asistencia, ayuda para los mineros MAPE. Entonces creo que es momento ya de concluir. Tenemos todavía más preguntas por parte de nuestra audiencia. Quizás los oradores quisieran contactarlos con ellos o tener una respuesta breve para ellos. Y bueno, quisiera yo mencionar que vamos a tener otras sesiones, vamos a tener el Foro Global el día de mañana. Yo los aliento a todos los participantes que vengan a todas estas sesiones que hemos preparado para ustedes, así como el evento especial del Banco Mundial, el programa sumamente interesante para el día del cierre de nuestro Foro Global. Bueno, les deseo que tengan una buena día, tarde, noche y esperamos contar con su asistencia el día de mañana.